and I'll go through all the formal introduction. Okay, welcome to this webinar then. I'm Francis Seeley from GlobalNet 21, and this is one of the regular webinars that we do with GUAC, the Give Us a Chance Consortium. And these webinars are a way of actually getting people to exchange good practice, to look at what they're doing, to provide information and to collaborate. And it's a webinar which forms one of many that will be built up in the library by GUAC and that goes on their website. And Alan Tallett, who's on here, is building that up. And by the way, if any of you have technical problems, type it in and Alan will try and deal with that for you. Anyhow, what we're going to do in this webinar is look at stakeholder engagement. We've got Jenny Riddle, you can see her there, who's going to actually do a presentation for us. She's smiling. The idea of this webinar is that so many housing associations and social landlords are doing incredibly good work and doing work that really engages their citizens and the people they have to work with. But they always don't get that engagement out. They don't often give enough thought to how they best can do that, because the world is changing rapidly. In the world of social networking, we're all learning as we go, really. And so exchanging good practice about that and learning what other people are doing and listening to people like Jenny, who's given a lot of thought, I think is important for all of us. So Jenny's going to give a presentation for about, I don't know, 20 minutes with some PowerPoint slides. And then if you've got any comments, please put them up on the side in the comment box or at the bottom, where if you go to the bottom of the screen, you'll see with your cursor, there's a Q&A box and you can type things in there as well. And then if you put those up, we'll put those to Jenny when she's finished her presentation and we'll have a chat. And if anybody then wants to say anything on video, just put your hand up and we'll bring you onto video as well. So this is fairly informal and we'll try and keep it that way. Anyhow, Jennifer, thanks for doing this. I know you've done a lot of good work with GUAC and you've helped a lot with their communications and engagement. So I'm going to go over to you now in order for you to give your presentation about stakeholder engagement.
Great. Thank you, Francis. It's great to be here. And as Francis says, I'm going to be talking about stakeholder engagement today. And I'll talk briefly before we start the presentation a bit about what we mean when I'm referring to stakeholder engagement, kind of going to define those stakeholders. I know that the term stakeholder is used quite broadly, and we're referring to, in this context, predominantly, well, only political stakeholders. I've been working with GUAC for over a year now. I help out on the communications. That includes things like member comms, working with Alan to communicate a lot of what we do to you as members, helping out with the PR, so leading on kind of the public relations side of it, media work, but also this side of it, which is the public affairs and lobbying, which is what we're going to be talking about today. I'll now share my slides and start off that presentation, so bear with me. So we're talking about engaging to influence, which is about the stakeholder engagement side of it. And I'm just going to come out of this, because I seem to not be able to, sorry, bear with me a second. I seem to not be able to actually go through those slides. I was moving them along. So I'll do it a slightly separate way that we rehearse, which is this way. And hopefully now you can still see those slides. There we go. Okay. So we'll talk about why stakeholder engagement is important, as for you in the work that you do within your housing organisation, and generally why stakeholder engagement is important for all organisations, actually, within the work within the community. Principles of that engagement, how to map it, how to engage, so kind of tactics for engagement, what stakeholders want from you. So when you're engaging, it obviously has to be a two-way dialogue, if you like. And although you want something out of it, your stakeholders will also want something out of it as well. So kind of it's a bit of a give and take. And we'll briefly talk about what they're looking for and the angles that they will be interested in when they're talking to you. And then what support GUAC can provide to you through your membership to GUAC. Alan, who's on today, has done a lot of work building the website, and we're just today launching a new members area of that website where you can log in, you can get access to some toolkits for stakeholder engagement, and over time the ambition is to build that member area and provide more things that are useful to you, not just with engagement but other stuff where we can hang things in that area. But for the moment we've used that member area of the website to host some toolkits for engagement, which is what we'll talk about today, and I'll briefly cover what those are. We'll then look ahead to the election that's coming and beyond. And again, we'll go through what GUAC are going to be doing post-election to engage with some of the political stakeholders. So when we talk about engaging to influence, and when I said earlier about stakeholders encompasses a huge amount of terms. And generally, it's any individuals or groups that have an interest in your organisation or an interest in the work that you do, or perhaps an interest in the livelihoods or the impact that they have on your residents. It's a very broad term, and now you're probably used to it in your organisation. It will cover everything, so it could be MPs, councillors. Then you've also got civil servants, the media, charities, business groups, customers, the local community, suppliers, trade associations. So I know that I used to work in a housing association myself, managing comms, and stakeholders. When I was talking within my team, we were very clear what it defined us, but you go out to the wider organisation and they'll talk about suppliers, customers, but in the kind of supply chain, the construction side of it. So it's a very broad term. It's anybody that's got any interest in it. Now, from a comms perspective, you take all those interested parties, all those stakeholders, and we group them together into audience groups. And those audience groups generally look like this. If you talk to your comms teams within your HA or within your organisation, you'll have something that looks a little bit like this. Political stakeholders, your customers, that can be private rented customers, it can be general needs, sheltered customers, and also any private sale, anyone that uses your product. It might not even be a housing product that they use, it might be an employment product. So when you're offering employment support to your wider community who aren't your residents, those will be your customers as well. And then obviously suppliers, sector peers, so that's like the CIH, HCA, NHF, as well as other HAs, other housing organisations, including local authority providers as well. And then finally we've got the media, which is obviously the press, sector trade press, can include things like think tank, also includes social media where your public, your customers can go on to. So for today's purposes, we're talking just about that top left-hand corner. We're talking about politicians, which can also be broken down. So when we refer to politicians, we talk about obviously MPs, councillors, ward members, so people that represent the very, very, very local area as a ward councillor, obviously. Cabinet members for housing, cabinet members for employment support or local economy, wherever that remit fits. Council leaders. We've recently had some really high-profile local elections across the country, and mayors have been elected from many areas across the UK. So, and in London as well, obviously the London mayor is a huge political stakeholder for us. You've also got included in that bracket politicians. You've got civil servants, you've got officers. So when you call up an MP's office, you often speak to a caseworker, and they're the member of Parliament team, if you like, and they are included and packaged up. Those people and those roles are packaged up within the political stakeholder. So why stakeholder engagement is important? It's easy to overlook it. It's easy to think that actually as an organisation you determine your own fate, and you do what you do. You have your own budgets, many of you are income generators as well as dependent on grant. And it's very easy to think actually we do our job and we help residents directly. We don't need to engage with politicians, and we don't need to have their endorsement or their support. That's quite an old-fashioned short-term view, because actually once you realise and recognise that political stakeholders in all their forms are hugely influential decision makers, where they are categorised either decision makers or decision influencers. So what your local ward councillor thinks influences how the council operate around you, your perception around you. They can make actions, change policy that really directly affects your organisation or affects the lives of your residents. And it's within their remit. And we've seen huge examples of this recently in the last few years, where decisions have been taken by government, by political stakeholders that directly affect our residents, your residents. Things like right to buy, welfare reform, universal credit. All those decisions have been taken by political influencers and directly affect the day-to-day lives of all of your residents, if not many of them. And I think this point is quite important. The nature of their work is two things, and I think it's quite easy. This is quite a good way to describe it. Actually, it's either problem solving or celebrating the best. So if you think about the work of an MP or a councillor, they're often, particularly during election periods, so the year before an election, usually not this time, but they'll be looking out for issues that they can solve, issues that they can champion, that they really want to be seen to have added value to that community, and by finding an issue, getting on it, campaigning for it, they become problem solvers. And then on the other side, if things are going well, if they feel like they've done, if things are going really well in their community, they want to be able to celebrate the best of it. And they will do everything they can, and it kind of shows off their work within their local constituency as well. And I think if you see it in those 2 points, you know that they're either going to be championing negative issues to change it, or championing a good issue to celebrate the work. And you've got to think, like, which side do you want to be on? And obviously you want to be on the best side. You don't want to be seen as a problem that they have to intervene on or solve on. So in terms of stakeholder engagement, we always want to shift the conversation to make sure that where you're doing a good job, the MP, the councillor, the cabinet member knows about it, and you get seen as kind of the supporters of their issues. You have many shared aims. Your residents are their constituents, and you have very overlapping issues. You have many of them have the same concerns: wanting to move people to employment, wanting to get off welfare support where it's been reformed, and really support the lives and ambitions of your residents. That's very much a shared aim. So now we're going to talk about how, from a comms perspective, we map stakeholders. Now, to do this, I've had to make up an example of a housing association, and I call it Brightspark. And let's say that Brightspark HA wants to map who their political stakeholders are and how important they are to them. This is called a tool, this is a stakeholder mapping tool, and you'll use it to work out who you need to critically engage with. Now, for everyone, for all of the housing associations, this map will look different because you have different issues, you have different local connections, you have very different relationships, some historic, some good, presumably, some maybe that need a bit of work on them. And then some of you will have new stakeholders in the recent council elections, and in the upcoming general election, you'll again have new stakeholders, new MPs that you haven't previously engaged with. So you will have different relationship statuses with your stakeholders, and this exercise really draws out the challenges in the current situation. It's a moving feast, so once you've done it, you have to then engage and repeat this exercise. But on the vertical axes, you have most powerful, so that's the stakeholders that actually can affect your agenda the most. And then on the horizontal axes, you've got supportive, so when they appear on the far right, that's when they're most supportive. On the far left, least supportive. And then when you map it on the top left-hand corner, you have stakeholders that are very powerful, but perhaps not quite so supportive. Now, these people, for the moment, you need to manage. Bottom left is monitor. So if they're not so powerful, not so supportive, they probably don't influence your agenda too much. So people that sit down there, you'll tend to monitor and see if they change over time. But for the moment, if they're down there, you just want to continue to monitor them. Supportive but not powerful on the far right. You want to acknowledge them, find ways to involve them. But again, because they lack power, they're not quite so important for you fulfilling your agenda. And then top right, these are the people that with all the power and all the support, the key to involvement can really help you deliver your business aims. So for Brightspark HA, this is again hypothetical. So you've got council leader, you've got the cabinet member for housing, you've got local ward councillors. Now, local ward councillors are traditionally less influential than people with power on the cabinet. So we put them down on the bottom left-hand corner. They're not too powerful, not too supportive. You just have local elections. Don't really know that much about Brightspark HA, so they kind of sit down there. council leader is more powerful, but again is new because you've had a reshuffle in this post-election hypothetical Bright Spark area. So he doesn't know too much about you. He's much more powerful than the ward councillors. So he sits there for the moment. And then cabinet member for housing, actually you've got quite a good relationship with, because he or she's been around for a long time. Again, is quite powerful, has a remit within your brief. Then you've got constituency MPs. Again, quite powerful. For the moment, they haven't been that supportive in this case. Bright Spark haven't done a huge amount of stakeholder engagement. They might have done a few years ago. This MP has been around for quite a long time, but recently they haven't tended to engage. Bright Spark have been worrying about getting their head down into work, delivering, and haven't been communicating that much with constituents MP. They've been doing a lot of PR work, so the MPs heard about them through the public media, but not directly. And then you've got government. Again, these are the most powerful. And in this case, Bright Spark have actually had a decent relationship with the department. GUAC's recently been doing a lot of ministerial engagement. So through that network, Bright Spark have been able to kind of foster a relatively strong relationship with the departments. And that's benefited. And for now, they feel that government actually understands what Bright Spark do, how they have the residents, and they feel like they've got a good relationship with them. And then you've got the GLA. So Bright Spark's based in London, just on the outskirts of London, and the GLA are quite important in terms of planning, in terms of housing, and some budget stuff as well. And Bright Spark have, through a separate network that they sit on, have fostered quite good relationships with the Mayor of London. And again, the Mayor of London is still more important than the ward councillors, and actually, in this case with employment support, doesn't have as much power as he does in some areas, but it's growing and it's increasing. So this is all hypothetical, but hopefully this shows you how this mapping tool works in principle, and you can see there where relationships need to move. You can see that the council leader, the constituency MPs are powerful but not supportive. So for Bright Spark, they draw from this that they need to engage better with those two key stakeholders. And then also the cabinet member for housing needs more support as well. So ideally, they will shift over those three stakeholders to the right, and also the ward councillor, but although he's not quite as important as those other three stakeholders. So that's the plan for Bright Spark, Jane. Now, when you're engaging with your stakeholder, you've got to think, what do we need to get across? Why are we engaging with them? What are we telling them? What are our key messages? I should have said before at the beginning of this presentation, most of you will have communications teams, communication functions within your organisation, and this presentation that we're doing today is kind of to give you a bit of a taster about how we engage, why we engage, and kind of tactics for it. But I wouldn't recommend that you go off and do this without talking to your comms team. They're probably doing great work, and they would appreciate being able to, for sure, appreciate being able to tie in key messages and also support you in doing this engagement. And having worked in the comms team in the HA before, that's exactly what we did. We supported the neighbourhoods, we supported the employment team to go out and do engagement. Going back to what you want to get across in terms of key messages, from an employment support perspective, one of the strongest things that you can get across is the great news. The great news that you do in supporting employment into residents into work and employment. And your key message there is showing off the work that you do, showing how unique it is. And it is unique. All of you do such different work, and there's no standard template for the work that you do. And even if you live in work and operate in a constituency with many, many HAs, I can guarantee that the employment support work that you do is unique to your neighbour, your HA member. So really being able to show that off is critical. Talk to them about the openings, any new schemes that you have, any new pilots, anything that you're doing, shouting about that to your stakeholder, making sure that they're aware of how you support their constituents, what support you provide, and how actually those MPs, councillors can signpost their constituents to your work. Then beyond that, this is more kind of technical, so from a comms perspective, you can talk about barriers, any barriers that you have in delivery of that. It might be ASB, it might be community issues, it might be something else, but if there's a barrier to you doing your work, fulfilling it, you can communicate that. It should be a two-way conversation. So as much as you want to say, chat about the good news, you also want to say what your challenges are, as you would do in any normal business meeting, essentially. If there's been a change in policy and processes within the council, within your organisation, talk them through that. show them how residents might access your services differently to how they previously did. One of the things that we talk about in stakeholder engagement is trying to preempt problems. So your residents, if they're unhappy with a service, by practice will often go to a councillor or their MP, perhaps to complain. And actually, if you can go to your MP and councillor and show them in advance how you're supporting residents and how things are changing, then if that change process happens and that resident goes to that MP, the MP or councillor can communicate on your behalf and talk them through those challenges. So it's kind of a bit of forewarned and forearmed, if you like. And if there's been a result in a change in government policy, for instance, welfare reform, universal credit, show them the impact of what you're doing, talk them through how it's affected you, and it doesn't need to, this does, welfare reform and universal credit within the HCA sector are relatively controversial in terms of at the beginning when welfare reform particularly came out, the sector found it quite challenging. But actually we're so far along now with that change that HAs have brought in new policies to deal and support with it, and showing MPs and councillors what you're doing and the results from it is a good thing to do. Even if it's good news or bad news, still talking them through the results of it, letting them see how it's affected you and in turn how it's affected their constituents, their residents. But I think the most important key message of all of those for you in your role as employment support providers within the HA is talking about the great news. Your role really, you want to be showing it off, making the announcements to those councillors, to those MPs, showing them the big wins, the great results. It's a natural area where you can lead on and support your comms teams. I would suggest that all those other three things definitely talk to your comms teams about and see what they suggest and the work they're doing, because they may already be doing quite a lot of the remainder of the three things. But the top one, I'd recommend that in your work you know more about what's coming than the comms team do, and you should really try to lead on that. So here, how to engage. And this table is just a kind of a little bit of a cheat sheet, if you like, in terms of what different stakeholders want, how to engage with the different stakeholders, and what they would benefit from for you. So MPs, when you get in contact with them, it's best to do it by letter. This is for a general introduction. So let's say post-election period. So we've had the council elections, we've got the MP elections, the general elections coming up. So getting in touch with them for a general introduction, as we saw in the Bright Spark example, they've had some new councillors and they want to now go out and reach out to those councillors and introduce themselves, and even the MP, they have lost contact with that MP. So if we're an MP, you always, by best practice, would write their constituency address, outlining who you are, what your organisation does, and some key things about the constituents in their areas. You can also follow up with an email, but it's best practice to send it to their constituency address on letter. And in that letter, you'd include an offer of a tour of your scheme and a meeting in support of it. So if you've got a great scheme in his or her constituency, you would offer that in the letter, that say that you'd love to show them that new scheme and talk to them about some of the challenges and some of the great work that's happening. And then for the MP, the real pull for them is getting brief. They want to get to know what's happening to those constituents, what's on offer for them, how they can support them, and again, how they can signpost constituents that come to them towards your services. And all politicians, you'll notice from what I put there, love a good photo opportunity. So particularly if it's a launch of anything, which we'll come on to in a second, having press and having media opportunity is brilliant. It's a brilliant pool for stakeholders. And then you've got the mayorals on the second column in. The mayorals are council leaders, the cabinet members. But treat these similarly to MPs. So relatively formal invite, send it to council head office by letter. Again, offering essentially the same things that you offer the MP. A tour and a meeting. This meeting might be more technical. They might talk in far more detail about some of the real challenges that you face, that the constituents face, than the MP. Although that's not a hard and fast rule, but traditionally, council cabinet members particularly will be more involved in the detail because they lead on the policy for that policy area. So if it's employment we're talking about, and you're talking to the employment lead, they will likely want to get more into the detail. And again, what's in it for them? Getting briefed, getting stats, getting examples of what's working, getting case studies for them that they can use on the wider borough, and a photo opportunity. And now finally we come to ward councillors. I think you can be a bit more informal with ward councillors. Their remit, their net, if you like, of who they influence, who their constituents are, is much, much smaller. It's much smaller than an MP or council leader for obvious reasons. And your relationship with them will tend to be far more informal, either over the phone, they'll pop in more easily in many areas, and you can definitely reach out to them for the first time by email. Again, what to offer, a tour, and for that, the main thing that you want to get across to councillors, ward councillors, is the service that you provide. Again, so they can signpost their constituents in their area to your services, making sure that if there's any changes that are happening, they're aware of it. And again, getting briefed, photo opportunity is the key thing for them. So this is the general introduction. So this is one of the key reasons, one of the main reasons that you should be seeking to engage with them on your employment work. The second one is new scheme openings. So whenever you have a new pilot, a new scheme that's opening, something that is a new employment offer, or any innovative program that you're launching, a new site, anything that is a new offer to your residents or to the wider community. And it could be you going it alone, or it could be something that you join up with other providers. Whatever it is, if it's a new service, make sure as one of your key aims for stakeholders is that they're aware of this new service that you provide. Again, for signposting, so they can signpost provide their constituents towards it. And again, the same rules here apply for an MP and council leader letter invite to either their constituency address, or if it's the council's HQ. Now, what's slightly different here is if it's an MP or a council member, you want to provide them with an opportunity to speak or ribbon cut. You want to give them an opportunity to be kind of a leader, to reflect their leadership within the community, and you want to bring them out. To bring them out to the event, you need to provide that opportunity. So you can do it in a number of ways, like we put their speaking opportunity for the launch or ribbon cutting ceremony. And again, what's in it for them? If it's a launch of a new service, it will be press, media, social media, traditional media, photo opportunity. If it's a ward councillor, this one's slightly different. Again, you can email them by invite, but you don't necessarily need to offer the ward councillor a speaking opportunity at the launch. You can do, many people will do if it's a very, very small issue that you know that councillors quite passionate about. You can ask them to speak. It's not unheard of, it's relatively normal, but you want them to be there to help celebrate. But you don't need to feel that you need to ask the ward councillor to be there to take a leadership role in that event. And again, same reasons for why they'd be interested. Photo opportunity and press. This has been quite a brief and quick run through. In terms of the support that GUAC provides for you as members, today we are launching this new members area of the website that I briefly mentioned at the beginning. And at the moment, we've got a couple of things here that can support you with your engagement to talk about the employment support work that you do. And again, what we've covered here in terms of how to map, deciding who to contact, we've covered that there. We've also included, you can see on the last 4 items on that screen grab, we've included some draft letters. And these are template letters that you can use in these situations. So here it's after the general election results. So when the election results come in, there's a template letter there that as a member you can go in and download that letter, tweak it. There's some gaps where you need to tweak it and personalise it a little bit. But you can send that off. It's a great tool, and I recommend that you go in and use it. I would also recommend, as I said earlier, before you actively engage, have a chat with your communications team, see what they're doing. It's not uncommon that a communications team after election would do something similar to this. So if that's happening, then great. Make sure that your employment support messages are included in the work that they're doing. If it's not happening, I would recommend suggesting using this toolkit and you leading on talking about some of the employment work that you do. We'll send around a launch email later today, which will include how to sign up to this and how to get access to this this new database. So this brings me on to the general election. So obviously a general election on the 8th of June, and there's been quite a lot of, obviously, a lot in the press about it. And we're just going to quickly run through what the different offers are in the manifestos. So the Conservative manifesto, there's not a huge amount on employment support. The ethos is remaining on making it pay to be in employment. So shifting people towards employment is still a good aim and a big aim for the Conservatives. No further radical welfare reform changes planned in this Parliament. Continue the rollout of universal credit. Again, obviously, to make sure it pays to be into work. They're going to incentivise employers to take on the hard to employ. And this includes people with time spent in prison, people with disabilities, people with mental health problems, barriers that stop them working. And people that have just been out of employment for over a year. Their aim is to incentivise employers to take them on by providing a year's holiday or years where the employer doesn't have to pay NI contributions. And they've also pledged on top of this to get 1 million people with disabilities into employment over the next 10 years. And they plan to harness the opportunities that are already available through flexible working and the digital economy, so kind of that agile workforce, harness those opportunities to get people with disabilities that physically stop them getting into work, to harness these opportunities to help people with disabilities into work. And then the Conservative housing pledges. So there's already a commitment from the previous Conservative administration to deliver 1 million homes by 2020, which they've reinforced in the current manifesto. And then on top of this, add another 500,000 by the end of the next Parliament, which will be in 2022. The white paper was out a few months back, and they wanted to deliver many, they've said deliver the proposed reforms within the housing white paper, and to free up land. So if you've read the housing white paper, a lot of those policies and those recommendations will be taken up if it's a Conservative government after June the 8th. They want to build new fixed term social housing, sold off privately within 10 to 15 years. Now, this is quite an interesting one because Theresa May has a different approach to social housing than Cameron or Osborne did. She's much more pro-it. Cameron and Osborne were much more anti-social housing and wanted people to be owning their own home, hence the shift to right to buy, hence the shift to help to buy as well. Theresa has a much more pragmatic view, I think she would say, around social housing. She's much more supportive of it. So it's interesting that in this manifesto we've seen a recommitment to delivering social housing. So unsurprisingly, Labour's going against all the reforms that have happened under the last Conservative government. So scrap the sanctions regime, scrap the bedroom tax, reinstate housing benefit for under-21s, all the controversial things that Labour reacted to in the last 5 years predominantly will be their key pledges to remove all of those issues. They are going to keep universal credit. They intend to reform and redesign it. There's a few pledges that they've made around it that they will change, but they've left it relatively open in terms of what that redesign looks like. Increase employment support allowance as well, and carers allowance to go up as well, in line with job seekers allowance. It's worth reflecting actually that within the Labour manifesto, their employment pledges, it's quite a large space dedicated to it, whereas in the Conservative manifesto, it's pretty much carry on doing what they were previously committing to and maintaining that ethos and getting people into work. Labour's pledges on housing, as I'm sure you know, the new house building revolution is they're committing to building over 1 million new homes, 100,000 council and housing association homes a year, which is a huge commitment. And they hope to be kind of that 1940s revolution in social housing. They will commit to help to buy funding to 2027, which is quite interesting because obviously when Help to Buy first came out, Labour were strongly opposed to it, and now they can see the benefits in it in the short term in terms of helping people onto the housing ladder, but they're not quite so pro the supply side answer to housing. They're much more, they want to push the demand side. Sorry, it's the other way around. They don't want to. They want to build more houses to build out of a housing crisis rather than help people finance that house. But they understand that actually Help to Buy is quite popular, so they've committed to defending it to 2027 and suspend Right to Buy until councils prove they have plans to replace homes. This is quite a tricky one for Labour because ideologically they're opposed to Right to Buy, but they know that actually it is a vote winner. Many people do want to be able to buy their own home that they already live in. So if they're happy to commit to it, if the councils are going to replenish that stock that's lost through Right to Buy. I think that was quite a debated one in the end within the party. So this is a quick look at what to expect from the general election results, and it won't come as a surprise that this is all hypothetical to a certain extent. No one knows. I mean, I'm sure that you know the rehearsed debate around failing of polling station, the polls, and how tricky it is to predict. But I thought we could just look at some patterns. You can see that map that's changing colours, where it's showing the difference between 2010 and 2015, and in 2010 you can see particularly Scotland has a lot of red in it, and by 2015 a lot of that red dissipates and becomes yellow. And it's quite interesting just to see how the vote changes and how strong that Conservative vote is in the rest of England, and how strong that SNP vote was in 2015 in Scotland, and the impact that's had, and why Labour are in such a difficult position. You can see on the chart on the right of that screen, at the last election, Labour lost 26 seats and the Tories gained 24, and that pushed the Tories up to the seats that they needed to win that, to take government. This time round, we're expecting it to be really challenging, and I think the complexity about how people will vote is proving difficult to guess. But when we had the local elections in Scotland, the Conservatives did quite well. They're going back a lot of ground, and if we see that reflecting in the general elections coming up, the Conservatives could be set to increase their majority and Labour lose out even more. Scotland's quite an interesting one because it really does determine the outcome of a general election. Traditionally, Scotland does have, it seems to be, if you ask people now how does Scotland vote, they will say, well, it used to be Labour and it's gone to SNP, but actually Scotland used to be Conservative for a long, long time. When I was growing up, Scotland was always Conservative, and then it became Lib Dem, and then it became Labour, and then obviously now it's SNP, and it's always become very passionately for one party. And I think we could see it going back towards voting Conservative MPs. And I think generally it's quite a hard election to predict, because obviously for many people this is a rerun of Brexit. And how that vote translates is very unpredictable at the moment. Now you'd expect the Lib Dems to really reflect that Remain vote, but they're not coming out that strongly in the polls at the moment. So there's all to play for still, to a certain extent. But as you know, the Tories are doing far better in the polls. And this is the poll from just last week, and even since I put the slide actually. They've changed again. It's quite surprising that Labour are doing much better now than they were expected to be doing at this point in the election. I think when they started out in the campaign, Labour were significantly behind the polls. They seem to be creeping up. And the polls this morning that were out suggested that they're doing much better. That doesn't obviously suggest that they can win the election or even have a form minority government, but Theresa's not doing as well as she probably expected to be doing at this point in the election, considering how much Labour seemed to be in disarray going into this election. And this is one of my favourite things, actually, at elections, is the bookies, what they say. And it's quite interesting that it's splitting between 1 to 20, 1 to 25 for the Tories, and a 9 chance for Labour and 1 in 10. And I think what the bookies say is usually a better indication than the polls, and they certainly have. They were right last time, 2015, and in 2010 they were much closer than the polls were. So yeah, I guess from me, it's really interesting to see what you think. I think at this point with the election, there is It's all to play for, as you know, and what people think kind of leads us as much as we know about what the answer might be. So it's quite interesting to get your thoughts on it.
Okay, that's great. All right. Well, thanks for that. That was a very, very, great presentation with a lot of material in it. If anyone has any questions, please put them up, or if you have any comments. Maybe I'll start. Well, I'm waiting to see if anybody has comments, but maybe your presentation was so thorough that you may not get many, but we'll see. I mean, one of the things that's interesting that you mentioned is that the need to engage is really, really important, and that came through everything you said. Why is it you think that some housing associations, and not just housing associations, but many organisations don't think through the need to engage? They just carry on with their work. Is it because they're busy? And is it because they just think they've got to communicate and they don't think of going beyond just communication?
I think that's a really good question. And at the beginning, I kind of talked a little bit about what organisations think and the work that they do. And certainly when I used to work for a housing organisation, many people, I used to come across the argument there that actually we don't need to engage because we are in charge of the work that we do ourselves, and MPs, councillors, political stakeholders can't really affect the course of our work. So I think historically there's been a sense of naivety around how influential political stakeholders are, and a kind of a misunderstanding of the power that they hold. And I think actually most HAs now recognise it, because we've seen so much change in the sector, like around welfare reform, universal credit, right to buy, huge in terms of the impact it has on HAs, and all that has been driven by political decision makers. Whereas maybe for a few years before welfare reform, we hadn't seen the impact that politics could have on the delivery of our day-to-day work. But now I think the sector's moved along in the last, I've seen it in the last 2-3 years in terms of how much recognition it places on stakeholder engagement. Yeah,
I mean, you say why it's important to engage, and that's a really good answer to tell people that. But the other point of my question is that engagement is more than just in communication, isn't it? You have to think much more strategically when you engage. I mean, in social media, for example, they talk about connecting, engaging, and taking action. And you have to think at each stage, don't you, when you're developing a strategy, and not just think sending a letter off or just achieve it. You have to think a lot more than that.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely joining up kind of the whole picture of it, and stakeholder engagement on its own isn't enough. You need to be doing all those different channels and audiences, and making sure that your social media strategy is strong and communicate the same messages, and it's all joined up. And it's definitely got to be strategic and driven from your business needs, your business objectives, where you're trying to get to as well.
Engagement often means not just a one-way flow. It often means a relationship, doesn't it? That when you're creating a strategy around engaging people, you're actually getting them to connect with you and create a relationship of dialogue. And you need to look upon that as your objective when you engage.
Yeah, I guess it depends. Yeah, you're right, absolutely. It's definitely a two-way. Engagement is a two-way dialogue. And when I think what I was trying to draw out earlier was when you're talking to them, you're also finding out what their concerns are and how you can help adapt the work you do, the programs that you do, to kind of meet their needs. This is like the political stakeholders' needs, and they also have a very different relationship with their constituents than you do. You essentially are a provider as an HA, and a politician has a very different relationship. So I think you have a lot to learn from the political stakeholders' experience. Definitely that two-way dialogue should feature within it. And yeah, I think it's difficult because I think it wouldn't always be the objective of comms to have a two-way dialogue. I think that would be a tactic within it. But sometimes actually, if you're doing a change process, for instance, if you're launching a new program, you'd have genuine two-way engagement early on in the process. When you're designing what that new program might look like, you do your genuine engagement there, and you get feedback from your customers and your stakeholders into that process. When it comes to the launch of the products at stage 2, your engagement there will be much more informative. It will be what the new service is. It will be signposting people to things. So it's kind of at different points in the process, it's appropriate to have a very sincere and very genuine two-way dialogue. But things move on at different stages, and you have different objectives at different parts of it. Does that make sense?
Social networking is becoming increasingly important in engagement, and you sort of said that in passing. To what extent should housing associations, social landlords look at their social media strategy now as being one of the prime areas of engagement, rather than, the old-fashioned direct mail? And if they have that strategy, how do they go about implementing it?
That's a good question. Social media is something that you can't avoid as a housing association or as any provider of any service. You have to have a social media strategy. And for HAs, that's certainly the case as well. What's interesting with social media is the difference that the platform has in terms of targeting your stakeholders. So we tend to see Twitter as actually it's a place where your political stakeholders hang out a lot, whereas Facebook is where your residents hang out a lot. So if you're wanting to communicate to residents, your strategy would include all the channels for communication, which would include leaflets, flyers, and it would also include, ideally, a Facebook strategy as well, and Twitter. But if you're doing a stakeholder campaign, you would definitely be wanting to include Twitter within that. When you do a social media strategy, you've got to have a reactive strategy within it. When you have a Twitter account, expect to have criticism from either your customers or the wider public, and how you will have a strategy with how you're going to deal with that. And I suggest that when you look at your social media strategy, you work with your communications team. They will have protocols in terms of how to deal with criticism via social media, and that's critical to get that right if you're going to do social media activity.
Sometimes when you engage with people like politicians, you assume that because you write a letter, they're going to answer, and very often they don't. How important is it to understand that, in a way, you have to persevere, you have to follow up? I mean, I do that quite a lot, and I send emails to politicians and that they don't answer, and I phone up and I find out they haven't read the email because it's lost in the system. So how important is it, in your view, to sort of, if you contact an MP, to follow up and phone? I mean, when you think about it, MPs have a huge amount of email, and if they get a 2-page A4 letter from you, the chances of the MP themselves reading it is not very high. So you really need to have a short letter. You need to follow up, get to know the person who's the office manager as well. Maybe then copy the mail into the office manager. And don't get angry. Don't assume you have a right to be answered. They're under a lot of stress sometimes. So in the strategy of engagement, you've got to think of how the other side work pattern is. You've got to think of how they have to deal with so much correspondence in the day. So do you think it's important, Jenny, for housing associations and others to understand that, to actually have a sort of empathetic view of the other side and then follow up in a kind way, because you get a better effect that way?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really important point. So the MPs' correspondence is ridiculously high. The number of letters and emails they get any day is huge. And in the toolkit that we've set up for GoAct members, there's some tactics there around how to do it, what to look out for. MPs also are legally not allowed to respond to any issue that doesn't sit within their geographical area. So you have to put on your letter, on your email, you have to put your address, so they know that they can respond to you. So yeah, definitely. You should send, if it's an invite, you should send it out by post. But you should also continually follow up. Things get lost in the post. When I send out invites to MPs, I'll send it in the post, send an email a few days later after I know it will have hit their desk. Pretty much the same content of the letter, I'll just put into email, and then I'll keep following up. And I'll keep following up politely until I get a response back. And quite often, it's not, if their lack of communication, lack of response to you isn't because they don't want to come, it's just because they haven't got round to, office manager hasn't got round to sitting down with that MP and going through their diary with them. And you have to bear in mind that when you're sending out letters and chasing them, every other organisation is doing the same. So you've got to kind of maintain that momentum on pushing that invite. So you've got to keep calling, be polite, do all of that.
Also, it can be quite complex, can't it? Because if you take an MP, for example, they have their own their own preference in terms of how they communicate. You know, I know one MP who just likes letters and is very formal and calls you Mr. and you call them Mrs. Others are very informal, and we've had some MPs, for example, who use Twitter. I couldn't get hold of them unless I actually tweeted them. Couldn't get hold of others unless you actually sent a message on Facebook. And others send text messages, and it's finding out really what their preference is in their social media operation themselves and then using it. So there's a bit of work in it.
Yeah, I think we'd be careful, would advise caution on that, because this presentation is predominantly aimed at building a new relationship from scratch. And as a rule, you're not going to offend somebody by sending a letter, but you will offend those MPs who want a letter. If you get in contact with them via Facebook or an email or a phone call, they will want a letter first. So as a rule, this presentation is about how to develop those relationships from scratch, and always do it by letter, because and I will be very generic here and say that the older MPs that have been around and in Parliament for a long time, and the Conservative MPs, if you have a Conservative MP and who's been around for a long time, you can pretty much guarantee that they will want letter communication when you first get to know them. And it tends to be the more urban, the younger, and often Labour, but that's not always a full truth, that are much more relaxed and informal with their communication. So if you look at someone like Stella Creasy and Walthamstow, you don't need to write a letter to her. You can definitely drop her an email, send her a tweet once you've got to know her. But yeah, for the sake of this presentation, in terms of building those introductions and building those relationships, just play it safe. Don't try not to. Your main objective should be introduced and not offend. So send a letter, and once you get to know them and their style, then adapt it and alter it.
So it's knowing you know what the MP wants and what they prefer, but that's the same true of anyone, whether you're working with charities or other organisations. When you develop a strategy, it's important to know who your audience is, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think at the beginning, that's where we talked about kind of identifying who those audiences were. And in the case of this presentation, talking about actually the audience for this is just the political stakeholders. But yeah, your audience is huge, and you've got to really identify who they are, and then identify their issues as part of that strategy, and your key messages for them.
Okay, and the other interesting thing that you were talking about, I think, is that you know that sometimes when you're engaging stakeholders, you're often sometimes doing it for a short-term gain, a short-term output. But you mentioned about the fact that because MPs and councillors, for example, make decisions that are important, the engagement that you have with them is about creating a relationship, creating an awareness over the long term. So there's engagement for short-term gain, and there's engagement for a long-term relationship. Do you distinguish between those two? I think you've turned your sound off, Jenny.
Sorry, yes I did. Sorry, the question is, do we distinguish between different types of relationships, short-term, long-term, is that correct? Yeah,
in the sense you may want an immediate output with an MP or a councillor. You may not be looking for a short-term output. You may be developing a long-term relationship because you know that at some point they're going to be important.
Well, yeah, I think that answers it really. It would be naive to try and arguably naive to try and develop a short-term relationship, because that stakeholder could very easily become hugely important within a quite short period. I think Jeremy Corbyn's actually a really, really good example of that. I've been working in lobbying for quite a long time, and when I first started working in public affairs, Jeremy Corbyn was an Islington MP. No one ever engaged with him. He was a backbencher. He was not considered influential, not considered important. And this was way before I worked in housing, but when I worked in consultancy lobbying, we had clients that would disregard him and never invite him to stuff, even though they supplied within his constituency. And obviously, as we've seen, Jeremy Corbyn is now leading the opposition party, hugely influential. So if you haven't spent the time building relationships with him because it wasn't in your interest in the short term, it can come to haunt you in the long term. So I think obviously there will be tactics where you need some short-term outputs from an MP, but think about the long term. Make sure that you never always strive to never get on the wrong side of an MP, because you don't know where or when they'll turn up.
Okay, Joe Miller's just put in the Q&A. It's a comment rather than a question, but I'll read it out because it's interesting. Joe says, can I just add that we've had great success in their organisation engaging with MPs when their tenants have made contacts with them. When hosting events or launching new services, tenants are involved in this. Sometimes it's best if the invite comes from them rather than from the organisation because you get more response. We had a tenant volunteer who used to be able to get our local MP to come along to more events than we could, but it still allowed us to have good relationship with MPs. That's a really interesting point, isn't it? Because the point is that contacting your MP is not just about you contacting, but deciding who is the best person in your organisation to do it, who has the most traction, who will be responded to the most. That's quite a good point that Joe's made, isn't it, Jenny?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's you've got to be quite flexible with these things, and in that situation where presumably that event, local residents were quite involved in it, and perhaps they're quite involved in the design and the implementation and launch of it, and like Joe said, they've got great relationships with the MP, then if you can use and harness that relationship, then fantastic. If they've got a better relationship with than you, then that's brilliant. But I think I'd advise a little bit of caution on that, because if you always want, as an organisation, and obviously I'm biased because I work in lobbying and communications, but I would always want to get to a situation where my organisation has a great relationship with that stakeholder. So if you can, sometimes you won't be able to compete with that. That local resident's probably a member of the party and it's very in close contact regularly. But the risk of being resident-led to a certain extent is if it goes bad, if things, not that event, but if your reputation is soured by the opinions of that resident, that can have a huge impact as well on the engine scale. So that kind of stuff is brilliant. Definitely, you'll get a better reaction by using genuine contact by your residents, but just understand the kind of the flip side sometimes where those relationships are strong if you don't have a strong relationship with the stakeholder, and they do.
Okay, well, I think we've sort of come to the end of our hour now, which has been a good hour, and I think you've given a great presentation, and we dealt with some interesting points that's come up from that. I'm sure if anybody wants to contact you, they can. I think you put your email address on your presentation at the end, so they can do that, and obviously they can contact GUAC as well. This webinar, as I say, is being recorded, and Alan, who is there in the background, you can see his box up there, he will be dealing with the recording and putting it onto the GUAC website, so it'll be a part of the library of webinars that is being done. So I think we've had a really good session here, so thanks, Jenny, for doing that. And you're outside the United Kingdom and you're taking time to do this, which is great, and the technologies work fine, and that's always a great relief as well. So thank you for doing this, and thank you, Alan, for helping in the background as well. Thank you all for joining and taking part.